Alrighty, let's get started. Well, I want to thank everybody for their time and welcome to today's presentation. Today's topic is cyber resilience, surviving ransomware. Are you at risk? When we look at today's presentation, let's go over a quick agenda as far as what we're really going to be discussing. At first, we're going to talk about the growing threat of cyber attacks and ransomware and how that's evolved over years. We're going to look at the industry shift in cybersecurity. We're really going to discuss an introduction to cyber resilience, talk about preparation and response to cyber attacks. We're also going to look into what is the proper technology needed to respond to a ransomware attack. After that, we'll look at Zerto's own continuous data protection and how it'll be used to respond to ransomware attacks. And then at the end, we'll actually hear from a very own customer of ours, John Hamilton from Sumter County, South Carolina, around how they were able to recover being compromised from a cyber attack. And after that, we'll give a few minutes for any questions. I do ask that if you have any specific questions throughout the presentation, there is a chat tab where you can ask your question, and then at the end, I'll look at the entire list and answer as many as we can. If we can't answer a specific question due to time, what we'll do is make sure that we reach out to you via email. So thank you, and let's get started. When we look at ransomware, right, I think we've all heard about this for a few years now. We started seeing the growing severity of everything that's happened. Even just within the last few weeks, we saw some very interesting ones, right? For example, we saw that Travelex during Christmas time was being held to ransom by hackers. In December, the state of Louisiana declared a state of emergency following a ransomware attack in New Orleans. We even had, right before the holidays, an organization in Europe shut down because of ransomware. Leaving almost 300 people without jobs, right? At first, ransomware really started exploiting very small businesses or even individuals and entrepreneurs for their critical data, and they really have the technical expertise to respond to it. But what we're seeing is a growing sophistication, a growing severity of these attacks that are not just affecting, mom and pop shops, SMBs, and commercials, but they're affecting Fortune 5, Fortune 100, and 500 companies that are also susceptible to them. We're even seeing even part of political responses in countries and nation states retaliating against each other. They're using cyber attacks to the private sphere as a method for retaliation. I urge you guys to check out the alert that we've received this year from the Department of Homeland Security around what we expect Iran to do and what are the ramifications that we're going to see in the private sphere as part of a cyber attack, right? So we know that cyber attacks as a whole, but specifically ransomware, they're not going anywhere, right? And if we look at the cost and the impact they've had on us, we're seeing a growing severity as well. So, the predicted cost for 2019, and we'll have to review this, was over $11.5 billion. Now, that's in kind of the total impact, right? Not just the cost of the ransom. But we also predicted a 300% increase in these attacks, right? That's over 850 million individual ransomware infections. But the most important part of them all, right, that affects each and every one of us is what is the average cost of recovery of ransomware. Now, this number is interesting because this is, surveyed between small organizations, SMBs, all the way to large enterprises, right? So, depending on the size of your organization, this number could either be a little lower or even much, much higher. But the average cost of recovery isn't just the cost of somebody who may have paid the ransom, but it's about the direct loss of service disruption, the impact on productivity internally and what it does to your employees. But most importantly as well, especially if you're a public organization, the damage it does to your reputation and your services, especially if you have low tolerance for downtime, and especially as your end users, right? So this is something that we expect to grow in 2020, so we're interested to see what those numbers look like. But what we know is we can't take this threat lightly, and we can only continue to try to grow in our responses because it's only getting worse. Now, I always try to provide a specific example as how a ransomware attack can affect a company. And one of the examples that we looked at is Arizona Beverages. I think, within at least North America and South America, Arizona Beverages is a pretty popular organization. They're over $3 billion in size of revenue. And they went through a pretty brutal attack, right? They were hit by IronCrypt, a strain of BitPaymer, and they had over 200 of their servers and endpoints encrypted. What this did, and the way they were set up, they actually, because of these servers were encrypted, they could not process any orders for almost a week. This isn't saying that a SQL database or maybe their Outlook was encrypted or even a web page. This means that they could not process any orders for almost a week. That is direct loss to revenue. They were losing millions of dollars a day in sales. And that's just the direct impact, right? We can have a qualitative number as to what the effect and consequence was. But if you think about how much time, how many consulting fees and time they had to spend recovering the actual data that was encrypted, those ramifications are still being dealt with by that IT organization. So, we've looked at, what the overall numbers are. We looked at an example, but, last year we conducted a survey and we sponsored this with IDC, and what they did was what we call the IDC State of IT Resilience. And we asked, colleagues and peers of yours across the globe, over 500 folks who are either system administrators, IT managers, directors, or even VPs of IT and CIOs. And out of those 500, 84% of them experienced a malicious attack in the past 12 months. Now, 89% of those attacks were successful, and 93% of those successful attacks resulted in data corruption or loss. We never, publicly ask anyone to admit whether they've been hit by ransomware in the last year or not. But what we do know is, based on the data that we have, is that you've either been hit by ransomware or you aren't aware of it yet. And it's a growing threat. It's a direct threat that no one's safe from. And especially if you think about yourself as an organization within the government space, but especially financial institutions, e-commerce institutions, healthcare organizations are all prime candidates to be attacked by ransomware. So the data is supporting that, and what we're seeing is that the industry is also responding differently. So we're seeing a shift in the strategy of cybersecurity as well. And the reason is, historically, if you look at cybersecurity since the digital age, cybersecurity has been focused on securing network parameters. They've been focused on specifically making sure their systems were bulletproof, that they were focused on prevention. Now, what we're seeing is that you don't just have one data center. You don't just have one location as a modern enterprise, right? You have regions all over the world. You have hybrid cloud strategies. You have multiple devices, IoT solutions, utilizing several clouds and disparate databases. So you can't really focus on prevention just because it's not possible. It's never worked, in the sense that something always gets across, somebody always falls victim. So the change is not just from securing these network parameters, but really focus on safeguarding that data that's spread across your systems, your devices, and your clouds, and also your data centers as well. So that change is really explained by the concept of what we call cyber resilience. And how we define, and the industry defines, cyber resilience is it's the ability to prepare for, to respond to, and recover from a cyber attack. And it's just the principle of being resilient. The fact that no matter what threat comes your way, you have the processes, the people, and the technology to effectively mitigate risk from a cyber attack. But there's a really interesting quote from the Cybersecurity Insight Report that was done by CDW, and it really explains what the strategy should be like today for modern organizations. And their quote is, "Prevention isn't the answer. Organizations have never had success stopping attacks. To survive, they need to build a strong internal security culture that mitigates risk. Surviving the accident is what's important, not preventing it in the first place," right? Now we're seeing that shift from focus on full prevention to mitigating risk. Accenture has a very interesting way of putting this, and they call it the bend, not break approach. And it's interesting, as you know, that as our systems become more diverse, as we grow our organizations, we're more susceptible. So our focus has to be on risk. So when we look at the elements of what cyber resilience actually is, there's two components of it. There's your people and process, and there's your technology. So first, before anything, you have to build a strong process and a culture that's focused on cyber resilience. But then you have to have the right solution, the right technology in place to be able to recover that data. So first, we're going to take a look at both of these, but first, let's take a look at your people and your process. How do you effectively prepare and respond for cyber attacks, and something specifically like ransomware? Now, most security folks and also infrastructure folks are very aware and familiar with the NIST cybersecurity framework. They're key components of this framework, and And I do want to make the statement that as Zerto positions itself as a solution for recovery from ransomware, we are not a cybersecurity company, right? What we do and what our solution does, it occupies a component of your strategy, but it is not a cybersecurity prevention solution, right? So we would cover the recovery piece, but you still have to be able to identify these threats. And although we've stated that it's a bend not break approach, you still have to do your best on prevention and to make sure that you're protecting your environment. You have to have the right detection, not just the right detection tools and solutions, but also the right processes to make sure you're aware of when this is happening. And then you also have to know how to respond. Now, if you're a public organization, this response component isn't just about responding to the threat and making sure all your systems and processes are in place to recover, but also how do you respond in informing everyone that you've been hit by ransomware, especially if that's a compliance demand. So ultimately, no matter what solution you have, if you don't have a best practice in place, a specific security framework and protocol in place, you're never going to be fully cyber resilient. Now, most of you already know this, but what we like to do as well is always get key tips from our customers who have been and successfully recovered from ransomware attacks and other cyber attacks as well. And they provide some really interesting recommendations. Now, the first one, I think it's obvious, right? It's continuous education, not just of your employees, but your admins as well, right? Maybe your infrastructure folks, your CISOs, and everybody's focusing on making sure they're up to date on the best practices and what they have to do. What are some of the new threats and schemes out there? But you have to educate your employees as well. There are a lot of really good organizations that focus on employee education around security best practices, but you can't just do this once a year and check the box. You know, everyone continues to see folks who leave, you get your company grows and you have more and more people. All it takes is for one person to not be educated, to not really be aware of what's going on, and your entire organization can be compromised. So you have to really make sure there's a continuous education, now, not just on the IT side, but also on the employee side as well. And this is an interesting one as well. I think this is part of the humility behind cybersecurity, understanding that cyber criminals are very sophisticated. They have their own R&D and they're very good at it. They seem to always be one step ahead. So you can, no matter how great your systems are, no matter what great security solutions you may have, never assume that your organization is impenetrable, because that's what's going to lead to lag processes. It's going to lead to oversights, and that's where you're at risk. And this one is a very interesting one as well. You have to be able to test it. If you don't have you can have the proper solution that works in theory, but if you haven't regularly tested it, well, then you don't really know if it's going to work when the day comes. But you want to also have multiple people within your organization comfortable with this process. People get sick, people leave on vacation, people have off days. You need to have multiple people, well, especially depending on the size of your organization, comfortable with the process and the framework to be able to effectively recover and perform their duties when that time comes. And you want to take advantage of third-party expertise, but you don't want to just take advantage of that expertise after the attack happens and you have a consulting organization come in and help you deal with the ramifications, right? We've even seen organizations here in North America that were about to purchase our product, decided not to, and then immediately after had a ransomware attack. And then they would have to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to consulting organizations to help them deal with the ramification. Bring on your third-party expertise early. Bring your ethical hackers, consultants who can help you analyze your framework, analyze your technology, and help you make sure that your organization is cyber resilient. Don't do it when it's too late. And always look for change. This really comes hand in hand with the assumption that you are not impenetrable. And so always look for ways to improve. But one of the things that I really want to focus on a little bit is around testing. You can't just have a solution that the white paper says it's worked, or maybe it worked in your POC. But when it actually comes to recovering your data, you need to validate, one, if this is encrypted, can I roll back and effectively recover? Now, how long is it taking me to recover, right? What are my RTOs and RPOs? Is this testing disruptive? If there is something that's wrong, do I have the ability to investigate for anomalies and make sure that I can do it, right? A lot of the reasons why people don't test as much is because a lot of their testing is very disruptive. So you need to look at, do you have a solution that allows you to continuously test your environment in a sandbox or an isolated environment to be able to make sure that you can recover? Now, we've gone over the people and process, and there's so much more information there to digest, but that's something we read at a high level. What I really want to focus now on is on the technology piece, right? We've seen the people and process component. Now let's look at the recovery technology itself. Now, when we think about recovery, right, in that same survey that we conducted with IDC, those folks who had digital transformation initiatives and they were important to their success, 82% of those respondents believed that a data protection transformation was important to their success. Now, what does that mean, right? If we think about the traditional recovery, we think about tapes and we think about backups and snapshots and all of these things. Now, organizations that are looking to strive and have digital initiatives going on, they've realized that not just in the face of cyber attacks and the threat landscape, but they realized that just in general, their data protection solutions must transform. Now, why is that? Well, let's take a look at the traditional recovery process, and even in the perspective of ransomware, right? You're always told, as long as you have a 3-2-1 rule, you're able to effectively recover and roll back that data, right? Now, this has been a long-standing solution that has worked to some degree, but as we know, our tolerance for downtime continues to go lower. We want to become as available as possible, and also you don't want to spend the time that your IT staff has on taking weeks to recover from a ransomware attack. And especially, you don't want any impact or halt to your production of whatever service it is that you're delivering. So if you look at the traditional recovery process, usually it comes associated with some type of backup infrastructure, usually an appliance, and then you have your offsite storage, right? Whether that's a cloud archive or even tape. Now, what are the specific challenges behind that? Well, if you think of the nature of snapshots, because of their impact on your production environment, the performance impact that it has, you only really get daily backups, right? You have a daily copy. You know, some organizations can have gone to 12 hours or even 6 hours, but at a large infrastructure cost. So you already have an inherent backup window and a performance impact because of the very nature of periodic snapshot-based backup. But you're also dealing with dedicated hardware that's expensive, that presents barriers to scale, and comes with its own end-of-life issues as well, and refreshes and maintenance. And when you think about it, backup is more of an archive use case. Backup should not be your DR use case, right? When you think about ransomware, as we've evolved as an organization, we started seeing that our customers who had a backup solution and us as a DR solution were mostly using us as a DR, and originally just a DR solution, to recover from ransomware, not the backup. So we're seeing that the innate technology of backup is not suited for these short-term recovery scenarios. And then you're dealing with an enormous issue, which is recovering multi-VM applications. And ultimately, do you really want to rely on tapes as your last means of rolling back your data, right? We've seen so many issues where tapes become damaged and they take time to be able to recover. So these are inherent challenges that backup presents. But if you think about, as we've talked about, snapshots, right? Let's say that you are hit at 6 p.m., right? You have to roll back to the previous snapshot. So you're seeing an immediate loss of your data. Now, a decade ago, 2 decades ago, that could have been fine. But if you think about today, is it worth it? Is it acceptable for you to lose an entire day of data because you're simply rolling back to your last copy? Now, for most organizations, especially at the enterprise level, that's completely unacceptable. Now, due to the nature of backup technology, that's impossible to do with backup. And that's why we're seeing that it's not set, that backup is not suited for ransomware or DR scenarios as well. Now, this is addressing direct data loss. But there's something even more important almost, which is the time of your IT organization, the time, effort, and resources that it takes to be able to recover. Now, when you think about being hit by a ransomware attack, right? Let's say that you're able to eventually recover all of your data that's been compromised and encrypted. Think of all the multi-VM applications that you have in your environment, especially if you're a mid-size or enterprise. All of these multi-VM applications that, because of the nature of the backup, you're getting different snapshots for that same application because those VMs are being committed to a snapshot at different times. So what's this doing? It's creating an inconsistent recovery. Now, this is okay if you're just trying to archive, But in the moment that you have to immediately recover those multi-VM applications, you now have to go back and spend a ton of time trying to figure out what the common denominator is for this snapshot and what checkpoint you can recover that application. Now imagine doing that across all of your enterprise applications, right? So we've seen the issue with direct data loss because of snapshots, but then we've also seen the other issue with inconsistent recovery of your multi-VM applications. Now there's another component to this as well. Think about the lost or damaged tapes as well, right? You can't put your faith exclusively on recovering from tapes. It's just not a strategy that's going to evolve well in today's modern environment. Now, what I want to do is I want to provide you with a specific example of a customer of ours called Tenkata. And Tenkata went through a ransomware attack previously and then had to go through one afterwards after they were a Zerto customer. But just for now, look at what their DR strategy was, right? They had backup tape and disk. Their entire file server was affected. But most importantly, due to the nature of their dailies and their snapshots, they saw an immediate 12-hour data loss regardless of when they were attacked. And most importantly, it would take them almost 2 weeks to recover their multi-VM applications. So keep this example in mind as we now move forward to really review what is the technology that would actually help you recover and mitigate risk and recover from ransomware. And that's what we would call continuous data protection. Now, at Zerto, we've innovated continuous data protection. It's something that we've continued to grow, something to master and expand across multiple use cases. But we're now starting to see organizations kind of go in the same direction. So let's look at really what are the requirements of continuous data protection that you need to effectively use that as a strategy to replace your tape backups when it comes to recovering from ransomware. There are 4 key components to continuous data protection. One, it needs to be replication-based, specifically hypervisor-based replication. You need some type of mechanism to granularly roll back to those checkpoints and what we would call a journal, right? So you need journal-based recovery. You need to be effectively able to recover multi-VM applications consistently and quickly. And it's something that you can't just do in the short term, right? You need to be able to have that recovery from seconds to years. So as people continue advertising what a continuous data protection solution is, keep these 4 components in mind. These are the 4 core requirements, right? Replication, journal-based recovery, application consistency, and long-term data retention. But let's look at it a little bit closer, right? When we talk about continuous data replication, well, it needs to be at the hypervisor level. You do not want any type of production impact. You don't want gaps in coverage. You want to be able to effectively and quickly recover, and you want to do it without snapshots. And most importantly, you don't want to be tied to a specific vendor. You need to be able to have this replication capability on premise with a multi-cloud strategy and not tied to an appliance or to a specific vendor. Now with Zerto, essentially what you're doing is you're creating a stream of data across your environment that allows you to roll back to checkpoints that were even 5 seconds ago. So think about, instead of recovering from a daily copy in a perfect environment, you're able to recover 5, 10, 15 seconds ago. And that's the last copy of the data that you have available to you. And not just copy, I want to correct myself, it's the last replica of the data available to you. So we're looking at the requirements for hypervisor-based replication. But here's a very important element too, and that's journal-based recovery, right? Having that mechanism, that stream of data that you can eventually roll back. So let's say that you are hit by ransomware at a specific time. With the right combination of replication technology at the hypervisor level and the journal mechanism, you can identify, or when you identify when ransomware is hit, you can simply roll back in time a few seconds, rewind and recover that data. And then you can recover entire sites, you can recover applications, you can recover VMs, or even specific granular files, right? Sometimes you only have a certain file and it's not worth recovering an entire site or application just for that file. So you need to be able to have the mechanism that allows you to recover what you need when you need it within any point in time, right? Within a 5-second impact. Now, we've seen the replication, we've seen the journal, and here's the part that's also really important, because this is what is going to save as much time as possible for your organizations, and that's application recovery. Now, previously, we saw that due to the nature of snapshots, your multi-VM application is now being copied at different points in time. So it takes a really long time to figure out, all right, when can I actually recover the common denominator of all this data for this application? Now, with Zerto, it's very different, right? We treat your applications as logical, cohesive entities. So what happens is that same applications, all the VMs designated to that application are now within those checkpoints. So you have the ability to consistently recover and to consistently say, hey, this application has been encrypted. We've fallen to ransomware. We know these are the applications that are in danger. Let's simply select that application and roll back to the point in time that we're comfortable with. And that's it. You don't have to figure out anything else. It's much more scalable, saves you a ton of time, and it's also much more simple to just treat your applications cohesively. This is what at Zerto we call a virtual protection group, or a VPG. And it only takes quite a few steps to create a VPG and designate the VMs and retention protocols that you have for them. So we've seen how to address the direct loss of data with snapshots and replacing snapshots with what we would call hypervisor-based replication, but also to be able to replace the treatment of multi-medium applications with Zerto's VPGs, or just virtual protection groups. But there's one more thing as well. You can't just have this solution for a few days. You need to be able to have this capability both in the short term and in the long term as well. And with Zerto 7, what we did is we basically expanded this journal into the long term, allowing you to select whatever secondary storage repository you may have and point it in that direction, so that you now have the guarantee of recovering your data granularly from seconds to years from now. And that's what's most important. It's the ability to be able to have granular recovery across the short term and long term, from 5 seconds ago to years from now, depending on what your compliance regulations are as well. And there's one more thing too that Zerto excels at, and it should be a component of CDP as well. And that is your ability to test whenever you want, to have continuous non-disruptive testing, to be able to validate your RTOs and your RPOs, to be able to test without impact to production environments in a sandbox or an isolated environment, so that you can see the issue, address the risk and the anomalies, and then analyze that potential infected data and applications and what we would call a secure zone, and you can roll back to production when you're comfortable with it. These are really important things, and we have a tremendous amount of case studies that show how our customers have been able to effectively test, address issues, and then recover from ransomware effectively. Now, previously, I had brought up the example of the ransomware attack that Tenkata would have previously. Now, after they had this issue, Tenkata actually went ahead and utilized Zerto for continuous data protection. So you saw that instead of having 12 hours data loss or 2 weeks of recovery, when they replaced backup tape and disk to continuous data protection, they then just saw a 10-second data loss and an equivalent 10-second recovery time. Think about what that impact does to your organization, what it does to be able to effectively, quickly remove any threat, be able to make sure that that data is safe, roll back to a few seconds ago, have that replica, address the issues with the encrypted data, and then from there, it only takes a few seconds and you can make sure that you're still focused on what's important for your IT organization. So if you really want to think in a nutshell what the impact of CDP, it's this right here, from removing hours and hours or even days of data loss, but also removing the amount of time and resources and ruined weekends it takes to be able to recover from a ransomware attack. What I want to do now, though, is I want to take some time to actually have somebody who's been through this before, who's been through a cyber attack and an exploit, and has been able to use Zerto to effectively recover. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to invite and introduce John Hamilton, who's a system administrator for Sumter County, South Carolina. So I want to thank John for his time. He's a valued customer of ours who's always continued to help us and really show how he's been able to use the value of Zerto in today's threat landscape. So John?
Hey, how's it going? Basically, one good example that we've had, about 2 years ago, we had a web server that was all still using Drupal, and we got attacked with a Drupal exploit, and it just kept happening, and luckily we had Zerto at the time, and we were able to be back up and running every time it hit, like probably within, I say 5 minutes, we was back up and running completely, like less than 5 minutes really. Um, like Zerta has been like a really great help for us as well. It just gives you peace of mind. Like if your backup, like even like one thing too, I would say with Zerto too, we was going through a transition to a new backup solution for our main backups, and in the meantime, we didn't trying to cross over. We went basically without no backup solution that was like fully doing backups, and we had Zerto to rely on. Like, okay, well, if something happens, we got Zerto, so we can still recover. So that was another peace of mind thing. So that's really the one benefit that Zerto does do. It gives you the peace of mind and knowing that you're protected.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, John. We really appreciate that. And, we had some key information too, as we heard his example and really what the peace of mind that Zerto delivers. But if you really think about what organizations like Sumter County and John's organization do, is they have critical services, right? Just like every other municipality. I always struggle with that word, but you're delivering information on you. Go ahead, John.
Yeah. Yeah, you're technically, I mean, you're right. Yeah, you're hit spot on with that.
Absolutely. And we've seen so many examples and just hearing from them as well, all these services that they're delivering. This is how the city runs or how the county runs. So when they're hit by something, they need to be able to quickly recover from it. And so what we're seeing is, when something like a Drupal exploit, like he explained, when you're seeing that encrypted, these key services, it's not just affecting revenue, but it's affecting quality of life, right? So, when you look at the industry and how we've been able to address things, and, we've seen that data protection and backup solutions haven't really evolved to the needs and today's threats, right? So that's when peace of mind is becoming really important, as John mentioned, to be able to know that you're not going to spend any more days on downtime. You're not going to be able to spend days on recovering multi-VM applications, but you're simply going to be able to roll back and recover that data. That's what's most important, that your IT organization can do what it's meant to do, right? To promote revenue growth and digital services that can grow your organization or grow the services that your government or your municipality promote. So in review, what we've looked at today, it's the fact that there's two things we want you to take away from this. And first, it's the people and process. And second, it's your technology, right? So if you look at your organization today, if you look at how educated your employees are, what your framework looks like, what your cybersecurity strategy looks like, are you ready to face and respond effectively and quickly to a cyber attack, right? That's just something that is relevant to all of us, even to us as an organization. It's something that we go through all the time as well. Now, from our perspective too, think about what your current solution is, right? Are you dealing with a backup and tape strategy for your DR solutions or even for ransomware? Is that solution enough for you? Are you looking to remove the threat of data loss? Are you looking for something much more simple that takes much less time to recover your applications? These are really the critical elements that we have to take a look at, and then we urge you to take a look at it as well. One of the things that I would ask as well is, we've provided the link here, and we're going to send you a copy of this as well, and it'll be in the slides when you receive the copy later on after my presentation. But check out the Gartner report on cyber attacks, and the title is How to Prepare for and Respond to Business Disruptions After Aggressive Cyber Attacks. This is an excellent report. We've been reading for a while. We've been tailoring our own strategies accordingly. So I urge you to take a look at this free report from Gartner, who's a respected analyst organization. Take a look and really compare what are the gaps in your organization as well, and what can you do to improve it? Not just your technology, right, but also your people and your process. The other thing that I would urge you is to just check out our labs, right? When you think about sometimes the way people propose solutions, well, sometimes it's just easier to show you. So you have the ability to access the Managing Protection with Zerto 7 lab with that URL there. And what you can do is, there's no infrastructure required, so you can simply access this anywhere and simulate a ransom recovery. Just so you know, right? When you get familiar with the GUI, you now know, well, if I'm hit with ransomware and this is what my environment would look like, this is how easy it is. This is how effective, how rapid it is to be able to recover from ransomware. So I really ask that you take a look at this and try it for yourself. There's no better way to understand something's value until you try it for yourself. And some of the more exciting things that we're doing today as well is, as you know, we have ZertoCon 2020 coming up in May 18th through the 20th in Hollywood, South Florida. It's going to be at the Seminole Hard Rock Hotel and Casino. I think you all might be familiar with that guitar building that they're still in construction. So that's where we're going to host our ZertoCon, right? So at ZertoCon, you're going to receive from the people who built it themselves and also our system engineers and our leaders around what are the best practices with using Zerto, some of the best practices for IT organizations in general, but there will be specific tracks around cyber resilience and recovering from ransomware that are going to be really valuable. And we actually have an interesting keynote speaker as well, and his name's Kevin Mitnick. A lot of you may be familiar with him. He's what we would call the world's most famous hacker, somebody who previously actually breached government data and is really providing a lot of thought leadership and innovation in the security world. Somebody who's seen the evolution of decades of what cybersecurity looks like and has been a hacker himself. So we have early bird pricing for that where you get $200 off using our promo code. But actually during this call, right when it's done, what we're going to do is we're going to randomly select 3 people who've attended and provide you with a free ZertoCon pass so that you can go. Once you receive that pass, you'll receive also a justification letter as well on the value so that you can present to your leadership so that you can be able to go. But that's something really exciting that we're going to do. Just make sure that we get 3 of you folks who've attended to go there. So what I want to move forward to now is actually to our questions and answers. So if you haven't been able to ask any questions, I'm going to give you a few minutes to go to the chat box and present any questions that you have. So I'm going to go ahead and review that now. And from there, we'll take a look at some of those questions. So let's take a look at some of these questions. Let's see, right here. So one of the questions that we have is how long does it take to get Zerto up and running? And that's an interesting one. So one of the things that we like to focus on is the fact that we're not an appliance, we don't have agents, we're simply software only. So we have the ability to simply come in and be able to be up and running in your environment within less than 2 hours. Let's see some of the other questions. So how long can we go back to using the journal? And what is the cost to increase the time to, let's say, 24 hours? Now, as we've stated, as it stands today, the journal could be from seconds ago to years from now. So if you've implemented that correctly and you have, for example, 1 day of the journal on your primary storage and then the rest of your journal sits on secondary storage. There's not a cost component to that because we're software only. It really depends on what your environment looks like and what you're comfortable with. You know, we see some folks who have our journal in the short term within 6 hours on primary storage, and then they have the rest of it on secondary. Some folks have it on 5 days, some have it on 3 days. So ultimately, depending on what your secondary storage is and what type of target repository you have, there is no cost from our end on what that means, right? And we can provide more information to you via email as well. Let's see. And this is an interesting one too. Instead of rolling back an entire server, is it possible to roll back a folder of data? Yes. So with our granular recovery, you can quickly recover an entire site. You can recover a VM. You can recover an application or even a specific file or folder and have the ability to just granularly recover that within seconds. See some of the other questions. Can this solution be used to replace tape backups? Now, this is an interesting one. We're software only, right? So we're not dealing with tape. We don't deal with physical, right? So as far as a virtual environment, the way it stands with our converged DR and backup solution, you have the ability to replace your tape backups when it comes to your virtual machines, but we don't do physical, and it is something that we haven't addressed. But in the sense of both short-term and long-term recovery, right? Whether it's ransomware, compliance, accidental deletions, even disasters, you can replace your tape backups as well. And as far as the hypervisors, we work both with VMware vSphere and Microsoft Hyper-V as our two main hypervisors that we work with. So when it comes to our licensing, with Zerto, it's per VM licensing. So depending if you use a cloud service provider, it's a little bit different, but if you are simply an enterprise customer, you license per VM on a licensing basis. And as far as the license that this comes into, this long-term retention, or this component with the journal and having the ability to do it from seconds to years, falls in line with our Enterprise Cloud Edition. Now, when we say the name Enterprise Cloud Edition, that necessarily doesn't mean that you have to have a cloud component. You can be fully on-prem. It's simply the name of the edition that this covers, which is pretty much standard at this point. Let's see some of the other questions. One of the big pieces as well, and this always gets addressed as well, is with Zerto Analytics. Now, Zerto Analytics is built in to the product, and it's built into the IT resilience platform. So a lot of what other organizations do is they may give you an analytics component, but at a specific cost separate from the platform. With us, it's built in, so you actually have the ability to maybe see spikes in behavior and identify the fact that there's an anomaly here, there might be a ransomware attack. It's SaaS delivered, so it's built in as the moment you become a Zerto customer, the moment you have the IT resilience platform, you have the ability to leverage Zerto Analytics as well. And as far as physical, it is not currently on our roadmap for physical servers for Windows and Linux. I did see another question on that. So these are most of the questions. What I'm going to do is, if there's any other question that we'll look within the chat box, what we'll be able to do is reach out to you individually with some collateral, some information, some technical answers on that as well, just to make sure that you have the ability to hear this out. So what I want to do is I want to thank John for coming on and giving his testimony as far as using Zerto. I want to thank all of you for your time. Stay tuned and pay attention to your email, especially if you have asked a question. We'll reach out to you as soon as possible. But also, you may have won a Zerto Pass. So just stay tuned. Make sure that when you see that recording come in your inbox, you'll also be able to get access to your free pass if you've won it. So I want to thank everyone for their time and their questions, and I hope you have a great day. Thanks, everyone. Alrighty, let's get started. Well, I want to thank everybody for their time and welcome to today's